The spirit of one of America's great trucking companies lives on in Cherryville. Carolina Freight may be long gone, but thanks to this museum, folks can relive history. Serving as North Carolina's only truck museum and one of just a handful in the United States, the Grier Beam Truck Museum has been delighting people for decades.
And these trucks do go from the oldest progressively all the way around the room to the newest one, the B model Mack over there on the other corner.
The history of this place stretches back to 1932. Fresh out of college, Charles Grier Beam borrowed $500 to buy a used Chevy truck. Working out of a small office, he made calls to get his business up and running.
And the second one in line there is Grier Beam's first truck, the 31 model Chevrolet with the oversized wooden bed to give him maximum capacity on those long trips to Florida.
From hauling coal for Lincoln County schools to transporting eggs and fruit back from Florida, Beam struggled during the Depression, but managed to keep his business afloat. It was then rebranded as Carolina Freight Carriers Corporation, taking its red and black colors from Beam's alma mater, NC State.
Mr. Beam started Carolina Freight back when trucking was relatively new. It was a very young industry.
Eastbound and down, loaded up and trucking.
As the trucking industry grew, so did Carolina Freight. By 1970, it had become one of the largest general freight carriers in the nation.
In the heyday, it was textile related. In fact, that was the backbone of Carolina Freight in the 60s and 70s.
In the 80s and into the early 90s, total revenue exceeded $5 billion, and the workforce grew to more than 10,000. But what took decades to build took just a few years to crumble.
Mr. Beam retired in 1988. He died in 92, and the company was sold in 95. So I guess you could surmise that once his involvement went away, the company soon went away.
Increased competition, the loss of big contracts, and rising employee costs all contributed to the company's demise.
They had a totally new management team that the old employees wouldn't recognize, and it just seemed that the time was right to sell the company and take the proceeds.
No one really ever thought about Carolina Freight not being here. I expected to retire with that company.
But before retiring, Beam set out to solidify Carolina Freight's legacy. So as part of the company's 50th anniversary in 1982, he opened the Grier Beam Truck Museum, right on the very spot where the company started. Built in 1930, the old Shell station in downtown Cherryville is now on the National Register of Historic Places. The museum building next door opened in 1987.
We have 14 trucks on display, and they range in age from 1927 to 1962. Our newest truck in the museum is 54 years old.
Trucking, got my chips cashed in, keep trucking.
Encompassing more than 7,500 square feet, the museum showcases Beam's trucks and tons of vintage memorabilia. Joe and Sandy Dismukes run the museum. They each spent 27 years working at Carolina Freight before it shut down.
That's been the wonderful thing about my wife and I had a total of 54 years service with the company, and we still had this keen interest and love of Carolina Freight, and we were given the opportunity to manage the museum.
From families to former truckers, there's always a steady stream of people coming in. Last year, the museum had visitors from 34 states and 4 foreign countries.
It's wonderful that somebody would take the time and the money that it takes to set this up.
It's really beautiful. We've thoroughly enjoyed coming and seeing this.
Perhaps, though, the best part for those visiting the museum, it's free.
We primarily operate off of an endowment fund that was started when Carolina Freight was still in operation.
Between the endowment and employee fund drive when the museum first opened and donations, the museum has been able to remain open all these years.
That money has been wisely invested over the years and very frugally managed. And we are operating off that endowment still after 33 years, which is amazing.
The Dismukes say running the museum has allowed them to reconnect with former Carolina Freight employees and keep the history and memory of this once great company alive. For Carolina Impact, I'm Jason Terzis reporting.
Thanks so much, Jason. You just never know where we're going to end up next in our one-tank trips. Well, the Beam Truck Museum in Cherryville is about an hour drive west of uptown Charlotte. It's open Thursdays through Saturdays from 10 to 3 or by appointment. To learn more, visit the Carolina Impact page at pbscharlotte.org. Before we go, I want to remind you about our 3rd annual STEM Award.